Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Audubon Society of Central Arkansas's monthly meeting. I'm the Vice President, Dan Scheinman. Tonight, our speaker is Virginia McDaniel. She is a forestry technician with the U.S. Forest Service, Southern Regional Station based in Hot Springs. Her research areas include the effects of prescribed fire on ecological communities and the herbaceous flora of pine woodlands. She's also an officer of the Arkansas Native Plant Society. She's got a BS in biology from Grinnell College and an MS in biology from Western Kentucky University. And tonight she'll be talking about how prescribed burns benefit native plants. So take it away, Virginia.
All right, thanks, Dan. I appreciate the introduction and the invitation to speak with Audubon, Arkansas. I actually escaped the heat from Arkansas, and I was assigned this week to come do some work in Asheville, North Carolina. So I'm glad this was virtual so that I could not have to cancel, but still be here talking to you guys. Anyway, so yeah, like Dan said, I work for the Southern Research Station, which is the research branch of the U.S. Forest Service. And so what I'm going to present to you this evening, we're going to talk about the historic landscape. Oh, I guess let me put my presentation up. Let me share my screen. That's what I should do first. Let's see, sorry. Okay, here we go. I don't know why it's, okay, there we go. All right, so what I'm gonna start with is talk about the historic landscape of Arkansas and what we know about it from early accounts, and then move on to an ongoing restoration project that's happening on the Ouachita National Forest in Western Arkansas. And then at the end, we'll discuss some of the common native plants that you'll find in a high quality intact woodland in the southeastern United States, or in the Ouachita National Forest, and why native plants in particular are important to so many ecosystems. So there we go. So one of the earliest scientific accounts of the landscape in Arkansas was made by William Dunbar and George Hunter in 18. Oh no. Okay, I don't know why this is. I think it just happens for the first couple of slides that I don't have control of when they switch, hopefully. But anyway, so it's 1804 to 1805. The Hunter-Dunbar expedition was one of 4 ventures that was commissioned by Thomas Jefferson to explore the Louisiana Purchase. And so it occurred concurrently with the more well-known Lewis and Clark expedition. But Hunter and Dunbar, the rivers were the main route of travel at this point. And so their mission was to explore up the Ouachita River from where it emptied into the Black River all the way up to current day Hot Springs, Arkansas. And so Hunter was coming from Pittsburgh and with a boat that was designed for much deeper water. And so they really struggled with these inland streams that were really rocky and shallow. And they ultimately bought a flatboat that was a little bit better, but a lot of their journal entries talk about hauling up this boat. It's really difficult channels in the cold weather because they're traveling in November and December and January, so it was not particularly warm. And then at one point, Hunter, is cleaning his gun and nearly shoots his thumb and 2 fingers off. So there's a little bit of excitement. Anyway, so it's kind of it's a bit of a dry read, but some of it has a little bit of excitement. And I was reading it kind of just to look for some quotes as to what the landscape looked like in Arkansas. And so what we can tell from this quote is that we have kind of open prairie and we have buffalo. And if we have buffalo, we know we have to have a fair, it's kind of an indication of an open grassland system in order to support those big ungulates. Another early traveler in Arkansas was Henry Rose Schoolcraft. He hails from the state of my youth, upstate New York. And at age 25, he traveled with his buddy Levi Pettibone down to what is now Springfield, Missouri, on the Ozark Plateau of the Mark Twain National Forest. And he explored down the White River into northern Arkansas in 1818 and 1819. He was especially interested in the geology, but a lot of the notes that he took were on the culture and the landscape and the vegetation. And they were a bit young and naive and ill-prepared for their adventure. I mean, I think they didn't really know how to use a gun. They got lost in the woods more than once, and they often went hungry. But he's a really engaging and funny writer, so I'd highly recommend reading his book. And so what you can see from these quotes was we got, smoke was in the air. They called the land sterile, which probably basically means that the timber was sparse and there wasn't a lot of timber. And then in this last quote, he always wrote how far they went each day and a little note. And this one was like, distance 14 miles, acorns for supper, which just kind of cracked me up. And then finally, we have Thomas Nuttall. So Thomas Nuttall was the first trained botanist to not document vegetation in Arkansas in 1818 and 1819. And he was traveling the same year as Henry O. Schoolcraft, but unlike the other two explorers that were here in the winter, he stayed through the summer. So he was one of the first explorers that could really actually study the vegetation. And he bought a skiff for $6 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, traveled down the Ohio and Mississippi River in 1818. And if you think about that, it was just 6 years after the earthquake of 1812, and that like uprooted all these really huge trees that were like crashing all over the rivers. And so it was a pretty treacherous journey, I think, down the Mississippi in this little boat. And I think there were outlaws, and he got swindled a couple of times. But he also met some really, really wonderful people. And he ultimately, he made it to the Arkansas River, traveled up the Arkansas River to what's current day Fort Smith. And you guys probably know, maybe you guys know, I know some of you on here are from the Native Plant Society, and we've gone to some trips to prairies around there. And he found some pretty cool plants in that area. And so what we see here's another quote: in this direction, the surface of ground is gently broken or undulated and thinly scattered with trees, resembling almost in this respect a cultivated park. The whole expanse of forest, hill, and dale was now richly enameled with a profusion of beautiful and curious flowers. I just really like that quote. And then, he talks about trees, if they were, scattered as if they were planted by art. And it was just a really, really open understory. And the other thing that he noticed was that fire was playing a really huge role in maintaining this open structure. And this is also a quote, I'll just read it. So many partial attempts at shrubbery or arborescent vegetation, which nature has repeatedly made, which have been only subdued by the reiteration of, anyway, I'm not going to read the whole quote. Basically, all these woody plants are trying to come in, and fire is the main thing that is keeping them out, is what he's trying to say. And it's what he's noticing in 1818 and 1819. And then I put a little thing in the bottom, 2000, or I guess it was 2019, it was pre-COVID. Theo Witzel did a presentation of the 200 year anniversary of Nuttall traveling through Arkansas. And I put the YouTube link here. It's a really engaging presentation. I'll tell you a little bit more than what I've told you here. Anyway, so from these early accounts, basically what we kind of see is, smoke was in the air and the woods were more open than they are today. That's what we're getting from there. And then we also have physical evidence of fire by these fire-scarred trees. And we've got a recent study in the Ouachita National Forest that's being done by Dr. Will Flatley and his graduate students. And he's done one study in the Ouachita National Forest, and they came up with a fire return interval between 3 and 14 years. That tells us fire was running through these landscapes fairly often. And then I just throw this in here. This is just a book by Reed Noss, The Forgotten Grasslands of the South. It's kind of, he just basically talks about how there are a lot of really, when we think of grasslands, we think of the prairie ecosystems in the Midwest, right? And when we think of the South, we don't necessarily think of grasslands. But this is a book documenting how many, maybe they're not big expanses like they are in the Great Plains, but there are lots of little dappled grasslands, and then you have like woodlands and areas that have trees, and that basically the Southeast was a lot more open previously than it is now. So in the 1970s, it's 150 years after Nuttall was traveling through these woods, and the forest of the Ouachita Mountains looked very different. The open woodlands that were covered with the beautiful profusion of profusion of beautiful and curious flowers had been replaced by a closed canopy forest. And not much is blooming here. But in the Ouachita National Forest, the main issue at the time was the near extinction of a bird that had just been listed as endangered. And that bird was the the red-cockaded woodpecker. We'll just do a quick go back. For those of you not familiar, we're here in the Ouachita National Forest, which is a 1.8 million acre national forest located in Oklahoma and Arkansas. And you can kind of think about it, it's basically a mountain range right here in the middle of a lot of a prairie ecosystem. All right, so the red-cockaded woodpecker, it's primarily, and you guys probably know more about this than I do, but we'll just say it's primarily a coastal plain species that lived in longleaf pine forests. But there were several inland populations, and one of those was in the Ouachita National Forest. The species needs not old growth trees that are older than 90 years because they're starting to have a little bit of heart rot. And the reason for that is because the red-cockaded woodpecker makes its nest in living trees versus dead trees. So having that heart rot makes it a little bit easier to hollow out their nest. And so the species, all right, so the species also really needs the open woodland condition. And in the previous pictures you saw what the Ouachita National Forest looks like with that closed canopy. And it wasn't going to be a very, very good habitat for the red-cockaded woodpecker. And in the 80s, the red-cockaded woodpecker was not doing very well. And so the Forest Service, with a little bit of prodding from the Fish and Wildlife Service, basically realized that they needed to do something to help the red-cockaded woodpecker. And so what they started doing was they began thinning the mid-story and using prescribed fire on a rotation of every 3 to 4 years. And so over the next 3 decades, or several decades, they created this landscape that began to resemble what Nuttall saw, 200 years prior. And so this is, I couldn't find an exact graph about the Ouachita data, but basically this graph shows the area prescribed burn area and the active RCW clusters. And what you can see is the more fire you have, the more RCW clusters you have, basically because habitat is being created, their foraging habitat is being created. So the numbers here, I'll just read this to you. In 2000, there were 48 birds with 15 nesting attempts. And 13 years later, in 2013, there were 158 birds with 59 nesting attempts. So basically, we tripled the number of birds and quadrupled the number of nesting attempts with our management. But the cool thing is that, tagging along with on the coattails of the red-cockaded woodpecker were many other species, from plants to butterflies to reptiles to deer, that were also being helped by this restoration work. And so this is an example of what it looks like on the Ouachita National Forest in an area where they have thinned and used prescribed fire to burn, and incredibly a very species diverse place. So yeah, here are some of the insects and animals that are really helped by this open condition. So an interesting story, after Hurricane Sandy hit the Northeast in 2012, a walkway at Coney Island was badly damaged. And so they needed southern pine that was rated as dense, and a mill that could handle the large size boards that they needed. So basically, I think they needed these 16-foot boards to rebuild this walkway. And so the only place that they could get this kind of wood that was dense enough to rebuild this walkway was shortleaf pine in the Ouachita National Forest. And so the lumber that went into rebuilding this walkway at Coney Island was milled by the Travis Lumber Company, and it most likely came from the Poto Cold Springs district of the Ouachita National Forest. So what I think is so cool is that here we have the work, we're restoring an endangered species and helping all these other species along with it. And then we're also providing a steady stream of high quality timber. I mean, this, I think, is just one of the wonderful successes of a restoration project on National Forest land. Anyway, I just think it's pretty cool. So one thing that the forest has been doing is that it was about 10 years ago, we got a little bit of extra money from, sorry, I'm losing my words here. The Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Project was basically a way to fast track restoration on high priority landscapes. And so this pine blue stem woodland restoration on the Ouachita was a priority landscape, and we got a little extra money, federal money, to make that happen. And so what you see here is some monitoring plots that we put in all across the several areas of the Ouachita National Forest. And I'm just going to show you a couple of data sheets or data that we've found in this monitoring. The monitoring design is a 10-foot radius plot. We're identifying all the trees in that 10-foot radius. And then we have 2 shrub plots looking at the shrub layer. And then we have 4 herbaceous quadrats. So those are like 1 meter squared, where we identify all of the plants in that area and then give it a cover class. And so basically what we found is in the areas that were treated, we're moving toward our desired ecological condition. So for a woodland, the basal area should be about 70, which is fairly wide open space trees. And we can see in the areas that are treated, we're moving that direction, but we're not quite there in all the plots. With the mid-story, once again, we want the mid-story, our trees like under 6 inches. We're reducing the number of mid-story. We haven't quite reached, our desired ecological condition of 10 square feet of basal area. But this is the cool part. This is the like, wow. So when we look at the ground layer or the herbaceous layer, what we see is in the untreated and thinned areas, we're not really helping the herbaceous layer. But if we looked in those burned plots or the burned and thin plots, we've drastically increased the number of species in the macro plots. We've actually analyzed the data since this graph was created. I didn't quite get it in this presentation, but I'll just say that in the 10 years that this monitoring has been going on, we've doubled the species of herbaceous diversity in the plots that have been managed, from like about 8 plants per plot to 16 plants per plot. So this thinning and this burning is doing a great job of increasing the herbaceous diversity. And as you know, that's going to help your insects, and that's going to help your birds, your reptiles, and even your mammals. Everyone's going to have a lot more to eat. So it's just a really pretty cool project that the Ouachita National Forest is working on. So basically what that looks like is that we have, that closed canopy covered with leaf litter, not much herbaceous diversity, boom, going down to what we see here, which is just a beautiful profusion of lots of flowers. I mean, they're not as curious because we know what they all are now, but they're still really beautiful, and they're providing a lot of pretty cool habitat. Anyway, and I'm just gonna ask, are you guys seeing, like, is my picture blocking the view of the slides? No, it's not. Okay. All right, I might just turn mine down. All right, cool. All right, so now I just wanted to get into looking at the woody, or some of the herbaceous plants that we would find in a high quality impact woodland. So there's probably over 600 species that we can find in the shortleaf pine woodlands. I think we're gonna, yeah, let's just see what. All right, so composites. All right, so the composites family has the greatest number of species of all Arkansas families, all the families of plants. So there's 321 species in this family. So you're probably all familiar with the black-eyed Susans there in the middle. Then we got a couple of echinacea, the pale purple coneflower on the right, and the purple coneflower on the left, and and then another Rudbeckia there in the bottom. And I just thought I'd give a little tiny botany lesson. You know, everyone thinks about this as a flower, but it's actually an inflorescence made up of hundreds of flowers. So each thing that you think of as a petal is actually a ray flower. And then that dark disc in the middle is actually made up of hundreds of little disc flowers, which is kind of cool. And then you can see this picture, they're just starting to open up on the outside. So pollinators can come and get nectar and pollen today. And then, you know, that next row will open up over the next couple of days. And so this flower, in essence, is going to, or this inflorescence is going to produce nectar and pollen for pollinators for probably several weeks, you know, as these flowers open up. And so that's just kind of cool to think about as well. Thistles. So everyone kind of gets a little bit upset about thistles, right? Because, you know, there's several non-native thistles, but in the United States, there are 96 species of thistles. 92 of those are native, right? So there's only 4 non-native species in the country. In the United States, there are 9 native species, or 9 species, and 7 of those are native. So this is just one thing I'll encourage you, is that I think when people see a thistle, especially, you know, one that looks so mean as this one's called Cirsium horridulum, and it is kind of horrid. You don't really want to pick it up, it hurts. But this is a native thistle, and I just really encourage you to look twice at the thistle before you think that you should kill it or it's a bad thing. It's a really wonderful pollinator plant. They really love thistles. And so just make sure before you're killing any thistles that you're not killing a native thistle. All right, a couple more plants in the composite family. We've got the prairie gay feather, the tickseed, and then on the right there's a Ouachita blazing star, and that is an endemic plant to the Ouachita National Forest. So that means it's found here, or in the Ouachita National Forest ecoregion, and nowhere else in the world, which is pretty cool. All right. So I'd like to take just one quick moment to talk about host plants, right? So we all know that flower and nectar and pollen are really important sources of food for pollinators. But at that point, you're only thinking about the adult stage of the butterfly, right? So you also need to think about the larval stage, or the caterpillars, that often require a specific genus or family of plants to survive, right? So this is because, you know, anyway, well, insects, plants and insects have co-evolved together for millennia, and plants are always creating toxins so that they don't get eaten by plants, and insects are trying to figure out how to deal with those toxins. And so not every insect can deal with the toxins from every single plant. So they kind of have to specialize in a certain group of plants. So the monarch is the classic example, right? We know, yeah, I'm not going to go into amazing migration because I'm sure you guys all know about that. But monarchs or milkweeds have cardiac glycosides in them, which are toxic to animals if they eat it. But the monarchs have evolved a way to not be poisoned by ingesting these cardiac glycosides, but they instead become poisonous, right? So they take these toxins from the plant and they put them in their exoskeleton. And then any bird that tries to eat a monarch is poisoned, like it can stop the heart of a bird, right? So monarchs, you know, they taste really bitter. And Susan Halpern has in her book, 4 Wings and a Prayer, says even the dumbest bird figures it out after the second try, you know, they don't eat a monarch. It's just not a good idea. But what I want to bring up is there are hundreds, thousands of plants that also have these host relationships with insects. So I know everyone's just like, we need to plant milkweed for the monarchs. We need to plant, well, you know what? You also need to plant a bunch of other species for all these other butterflies or insects, native insects that depend on them. And so I'm just going to give you one example here, which is the spicebush butterfly. So its larva can only eat 2 species. It can eat spicebush or sassafras. So basically, we lose spicebush and sassafras. That means we also lose this butterfly, right? Which is not good. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to get you to think about, planting a diversity of plant. Another reason why I really like the spicebush swallowtail is the larva has pretty ingenious camouflage to not get eaten by a bird, right? It's the first one in the upper right corner. It looks like bird poop, right? So when it's really little, you know, it looks like bird poop. So the bird's not going to eat that. That's awesome. And then as it goes through its end stars, I think there are 5 end stars, and then ultimately ends up with these big eye spots, which I've heard can kind of make it look bigger than it is. It may even make it look like a snake or something, just something that's going to startle a bird and make it not want to eat it. So it's one of my favorite caterpillars. All right, so the final composite that I'm going to talk about is ironweed. So it's a fall blooming plant, and the purple flowers have a real nice contrast, you know, to the goldenrods that are typically blooming at the same time. So it is the host plant of the painted lady, which is there on the left. So all right. And then milkweeds, obviously, we know milkweeds are really important. You got the great orange flowers, the butterfly weed, the red ring milkweed, green milkweed. If you have an opportunity to get on the Arkansas Native Plant Society, we've been having, you guys might be familiar, we've been having a bunch of webinars with the Arkansas Native Plant Society. And I think Eric Sundell gave one about milkweed pollination, which is a phenomenal story. If you ever get a chance to look at that, it's a great story. Violets are the host plant of the Diana fritillary, and the Diana fritillary is the state butterfly of Arkansas. And it's sexually dimorphic, which means the male and the female look different. So the female is blue and black, and the male is orange and black. And then there are just a couple of violets there. The Carolina violet and the bird's foot violet. All right, the mint family. All right, so there's one plant here, the short-toothed mountain mint. If you want to plant a plant that pollinators really like, I mean, it's like birthday cake for them or something. Wherever I've planted this, I always seem to get hundreds and hundreds of butterflies around it. So it's a really great or pollinators really like mint plants. So yeah, we got the slender mountain mint here, and I said the short tooth mountain mint and the white leaf mountain mint, and then bee balm also is a really nice species. And I also wanted to I also wanted to thank, let me just say right here that I wouldn't have such a visually wonderful presentation if it weren't for Mike Weatherford and Eric Hunt. So any of these pictures in these, any pictures that I have that has a pollinator in it, that was most likely taken by Mike Weatherford, and any beautiful, beautiful plant was probably taken by Eric Hunt, and any kind of okay picture was probably taken by me. I've given credit on the slides, but I just also wanted to give them a huge shout out for all the wonderful pictures they take. All right, the pea family or the bean family. You probably recognize these plants from, you know, beans grown in your garden. The wild indigo are really nice prairie and woodland species. Yeah, and then the goat's rue has this really, really beautiful pink and cream flowers. And then oh yeah, that's what I was gonna say, sorry. The plants in the pea family are host plant for the clouded sulfur. So that's down there. And I don't know, sometimes I give this presentation to more manager types, but if you ever go on any Forest Service land, you'll probably run into Sericea lespedeza, which is a non-native lespedeza, and it has pretty ill effects on wildlife and wildlands. But I just want to make you guys all aware that there's lots of native bush clovers and beggar's lice, lespedezas and desmodiums. There are 18 desmodiums in Arkansas, all but 1 are native. Of the 10 lespedezas, all but 3 are native. And so the seeds are preferred food of a lot of bird species like quail and turkey. They're browsed by deer. Additionally, legumes, you know, fix nitrogen in the soil. And so they're just a really nice plant. And then one group of plants that sometimes I feel like we forget about in terms of pollinators are grasses. Right, and grasses are actually the host plant of a variety of species. And I took this picture of this egg. It's on a dicanthelium I found, and I just call them mystery eggs. I'm sure I could figure out what they go to, but I kind of just like leaving it as a mystery sometimes. So anyway, yeah, native grasses are really, really important. And they're beautiful, right? You got Indian grass, little blue stem, switchgrass. They're just really, they're beautiful, and they're essential to the ecosystem. All right, so that's all I have. You know, fire is just a really, really important sorry, I'm running out of my words. Fire is really important in maintaining diversity in the Arkansas ecosystems. And, you know, what we're finding is that the more burning we do, the more biodiversity we get. So that's all I've got.
Thank you, Virginia. You've had a long day in the field hiking up 70% slopes and measuring plant species, so we can all forgive you for some memory lapses tonight. No worries.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm running out a little bit, not a lot of sleep and a lot of traveling. So yeah, thanks.
So again, if you have questions, you can put those in the chat box, or you can take yourself off of mute and ask your question, but I will get started.
Okay.
I was wondering if, how does first of all, it's really always great to see how our public agencies are managing public lands, and to see the success that you're all having with this endeavor. I'm familiar with the CFLR. So
okay.
Kind of Audubon was invited at the beginning. We weren't able to participate back then, but I know you guys are doing great work over a large area, and it's great to see that is having results, measurable results. So thank you for what you're doing there. I was wondering, how does the Forest Service balance the needs of different species that need different fire frequencies?
Well, I think one way we do that is that I think right now, I think we've restored about 150,000 acres. We want to restore 300,000 acres. But even when we get to restoring 300,000 acres, that's only 18% of the forest. So that means we still have 82% of the forest that's not getting any fire, that's in that more closed canopy condition. So I would say that in terms of historically how much fire burned and how open the systems were, it should probably be more like 60 or 70% open and 30 or 40%, closed canopy. So I know there is a concern with some ground nesting birds. I know spring burns can have an effect on those. And I think one thing the Forest Service is trying to do is we're trying to spread out the season we're doing our burning. And so maybe it's not all in the spring, but doing a little bit more in the summer and a little bit more in the fall. As you know, the government it's hard to change, and there are various reasons why we don't burn in the summer. Well, one of the reasons now is we're on a fire moratorium. We're not allowed to do any prescribed fire right now because of the some of the fires that are happening out west, and we need to put our resources out there and that kind of thing. So does that answer your question? We're trying to spread out the burning a little bit, I guess, is one way we're trying.
You're not going to get to all the areas every year, so there's going to be many years that won't go. A parcel will not have a burn, and the species that need a wider burn frequency will be okay in that time frame. Yes.
So you said it way better than I said it. I gave you the information, but you answered your question.
It begs the question, like, how many years is it going to take for you to get to 60% or plus of the forest having the burn cycle that's desired?
It's going to take forever. I don't know. We always have goals, right?
Yeah.
And we just got to start little by little, I guess. And I think some of the data that we're collecting and what we're finding out with the burning that we are doing and the results it's getting, I'm hoping that that's going to say, oh, wow, we're actually getting what we thought we were going to get. Or maybe it's even better than we hoped. And maybe that will encourage maybe, more funding and more people that are able to do the work. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you're measuring the vegetation so you can show you're having results. And John wants to know if you're doing any studies of migratory birds on your burned versus unburned areas.
I am not. I know we do. There have been some studies of birds in areas, the unburned and the burned areas. Definitely, we have studies going on. I don't feel versed enough to answer. I don't know what's going on with those studies. So
maybe if you can find out who's doing the work, and we can have that person come on and talk about the work.
Yeah, definitely.
And again, anyone want to take themselves off of mute and ask a question, feel free. I'll give you a moment. Since you mentioned fires out west, I was wondering if that kind of catastrophic event could occur in Arkansas, given that there is a pretty good history of prescribed burns in this state.
Yes, so we have had extreme fire behavior in Arkansas, and there actually was a fire. It's called the Rainbow Springs Fire. I think it was in 1980 that we did have a couple of Forest Service people that were overrun by fire and passed away. So it is possible to have extreme fire behavior, but it's much less likely than it is out west because we don't have what are called the ladder fuels. We don't have these conifers where the flames can climb up and then get into the canopy of the tree and the wind blow it and you end up with these huge crown fires. Like, it's highly unlikely that will happen. And the other thing is we're doing so much restoration that we're keeping this, we're keeping it more open where it's open, the fire is going to just run through those grassy ecosystems quickly and, not cause, large fires. In the areas that we're not burning, those are kind of, becoming more mesic and less likely to burn to some extent. So yeah, I would say it's possible, but not very likely in our system to end up with anything like what they have going on out west.
That's a relief.
Yes.
Sarah asks about, is there a certain bush or spice bush that the spice bush swallowtail prefers, but spice bush is the species. What's the scientific name again of spice bush?
So there's Lindera benzoin, that's the common spice bush, and then there's pondberry, which is Lindera melicifolia. That's actually an endangered species. I think it will eat both of those. It will eat both of those, but obviously it's gonna more often eat the common species because it's common. And then it also eats sassafras, and there's only one sassafras. So yeah.
Nancy wants to know, how would you handle small acres of forest that have homes on them or near them?
Small acres.
There's a prescribed burns.
So for like if a private landowner wanted to do a prescribed burn, or the Forest Service, how do we prevent a house from burning down?
Nancy, do you want to clarify your question? I know there are inholdings in the National Forest, right? So you got to be
right. So I'll just say, if there's an inholding, we would bulldoze a line around that inholding, and then we would burn, away from the fire, and we make sure it doesn't get on their land. Has a fire gotten out and burned private land? Yes, that has happened, but it doesn't happen very often, and we can usually obviously get it out before it causes too much damage. And a lot of landowners in Arkansas, that we have what's called a Stevens Agreement, where we can actually burn some of their land so that they don't have to do it. If it's connected to one of our prescribed burn units, they can have a prescribed burn on their property and not have to do it. And so sometimes that's really helpful to the landowner to, maintain their open structure of their forest.
That's my question. I have small acreage with a home on it, and I know it needs to be burned, but I wouldn't be able to do that myself. I'd have to hire someone, and no safe way to do it. Would I be better off to just rake the leaves and pick up the dead, or what would be my action that I should do?
Right. So I think the state might have programs that can help you do some prescribed fire on your property. You can burn like really small areas, like if you rake a line, around something and then just set little bits on fire. It's possible that some people do burn on their own property. You have to get a permit from the state, and you do have to know what you're doing. Is your land anywhere near Forest Service land?
No.
Okay.
Corps of Engineer land, but they don't do burns.
Okay. Yeah, I would contact the state and see if they could help you. How many acres is it?
It's 6.
6 acres. Okay. Yeah, and see if they might be able to, if they have a program that might be able to help you do that, or you could contract it out too. You could contract it out to somebody to burn it.
Yeah, Nancy, the Forestry Commission has resources to help private landowners that have forests.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Another question.
The
forest. Oh, someone want to speak up? Go ahead.
I have a comment. Barry and I had the Forest Service come where we live to see if we could do a prescribed burn, and essentially it was not doable because they said the smoke would be so great, and with the other homes around, it was not possible. So that was really disappointing, but I can understand why they would have that attitude. We have 5 acres.
Hmm.
And I'll add that next month's speaker, Nate Weston with Beaver Watershed Alliance, will be talking more about how private landowners can do habitat restoration. And also, in addition to burning, you can also do brush hogging, tree cutting, those sorts of things to clear the understory or overstory and help do restoration without burning.
Yeah. Yeah.
The question is, does the Forest Service do any planting in the restoration areas, or all the species that you see after the burns from the seed bed?
So we don't plant any of the herbaceous plants out there. They're all coming up from the seed bank, as far as we know. I mean, I have been wanting to do a seed bank study just to actually, see is, some people say that it's just naturally seeding in. I think it happens so fast that we're pretty certain that it's in the seed bank. But as I said, I haven't done the seed bank study yet. It's a good question.
And if you're all interested in plants, I would highly recommend David Attenborough's latest series, Green Planet. It is amazing. And he also goes into the insect plant interactions and how when an insect starts chewing on the leaf, the plant sends chemicals throughout its body, just like a nervous system, and tells the other parts of its tissues, other leaves, to start producing those chemicals to ward off the insect invader.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah, I'm just following that.
Yeah, and there are some plants that are even connected by their roots. So one tree starts to get eaten, and it will tell all the other trees around it, hey, start producing chemicals, we're being attacked.
Put up the defenses.
Virginia, how long do the seeds last in the seed bank? And I don't know if everybody knows what that term means. And how long are they viable in the
That
ground?
is also a really great question. And I'm not exactly sure how long. I mean, I think it depends on the species. And so, yeah, basically the seed bank is, well, when the plants grow up, they drop their seeds. And then I think as the forest is encroached and shaded and there's not enough sunlight reaching the ground, and then the trees, the leaf litter falls, and basically the herbaceous plants can't really grow. And so they're just those seeds that were left from the time when it was more open. And then, yeah, as to whether are those seeds, have they been in there 10 years? Have they been in there 50 years? Like that, I don't know. I mean, I know some say they lose viability after a couple of years, but I don't know. Some of them, some seeds, you hear these studies about, will a burn happen? We hadn't seen that plant for 100 years, and boom, all of a sudden there was like 1,000 of them. So it varies by species, and I'm not really sure what those numbers are. So.
Yeah, I know Karen Rowe, when we visited the Freddie Black Choctaw West tract that she was converting into wetland for the shorebirds, that when they took out the trees, they were very surprised at how fast the cattails returned. I think she said if they came back too fast, and they actually had to bush hog some of them to control them. So,
wow.
And that had been, in woods for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting.
Any other questions? How big is the pH change by burning, and how long does it take to return to normal? Soil pH, I assume.
I would be making up things if I said anything. I'm not sure. I mean, I think ash is basic, right? So yeah, I'm not sure about pH and fires. I don't really know. Sorry.
I have a comment about that. I follow a group on Facebook, and I know Facebook is a great source of information, but these are college professors, they're horticulturalists, and they maintain it is really hard to change the pH of the soils long-term, even if you make amendments and do stuff. So, you know, if that's true, then, you know, the fire and the ashes from the fire might change it temporarily, but the underlying soil's pH probably wouldn't change all that much. At least that's what they say. And these are all PhDs who seem to know what they're talking about.
All right, no, that's a great answer. That sounds like a good answer to me. Thanks.
And on the whole, I imagine that ash is really good for returning nutrients to the soil as well.
Yes,
The overall
absolutely.
forest health.
Absolutely.
Other questions? All good questions, folks. Okay, well, thank you so much, Virginia, for presenting to us tonight and for sharing all the great stuff that the Ouachita National Forest is doing, the Forest Service is doing out there. I really appreciate it. Thanks for all the work that you're doing. Thanks for all the stuff you do for Arkansas Native Plant Society as well. It's a great organization. Again, if you love native plants, I encourage you to become a member of that organization as well. They have field trips all around the state, so it's a great way to learn your native plants and to even exchange native plants with people who love to garden with those species. So we are going to move to our business section now, and you're welcome to stick around and see what Audubon Society of Central Arkansas is up to.
Virginia,